There are many who have gone against the Alpha Legion. There are many who think they are prepared. And many of them have woken on the morning of battle to find cables cut and equipment missing. But then again, there are many who never wake at all. With the new edition of Horus Heresy, I decided it was time to put a dent in my pile of shame and paint up a small Alpha Legion force that I've had lying around for a while. But for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, I'll quickly explain that while I build our leader guy. Contrary to what it might sound like, the Alpha Legion is not a 40 quid per month course on how to be an alpha male, but is instead an army of stealth and subterfuge focused super soldiers from the Warhammer 40k universe. This is an army for the prequel game, Horus Heresy, which sets up the 40k universe with a Space Marine civil war, where our Alpha Legion are busy being on both sides at once. Okay, that's a vastly simplified description, but our leader guy, the Exodus, is built, so that's all we've got time for. Next I turned to building the infantry, and I had 10 of these guys. I wanted to make 2 squads of 5 basic infantry and 5 guys with snipers. There are technical terms for these, but I don't know what they are, and since the game is being entirely updated in a month or so, I don't think there's much point in learning them right now. The basic infantry I assembled as normal, but the sniper dudes would need a little bit of modification. The bulk of this would come from these extra sniper holding arms from Tortuga Bay. These needed to be washed since they were resin, like the Exodus, and so would be coated in a layer of mold release that would stop paint sticking in later stages. These arms were also a bit chunkier and longer than those of the standard infantry, so I slightly shaved down the connection points between the shoulders and body to reduce the added width, after which they were glued on. I did want the leader of this squad to have a little bit more character though, but the kit that I had to build these infantry from didn't have a whole lot of options I felt really fitted the Alpha Legion vibe. I wanted him to be resting his sniper up on his shoulder, so I took the tightest arm I could find in the kit and cut and readjusted the pose until I felt it looked natural. Then the gaps were filled in with green stuff. Then I took this weird antenna skull arrangement, which I cut down and added just the antenna section onto the leader's backpack. Partially because I thought the antenna on its own looked more Alpha Legion-y, but also because I wanted to steal this skull for another Inquisitorial Strike Force video. At some point I'm sure it will come in handy. For the second arm, I took another arm from the base infantry kit and then cut the open rifle supporting hand from the Tortuga Bay arms and combined the two. After which I glued a grenade I cut from one of the bunches of accessories into his hand, which gave him the look of holding a grenade. It's kind of a lot of work to just give some guy a grenade, but I don't really have that many Space Marine arms. I'm also going to include a dreadnought in this army, but I'd actually built it a few years ago, so I could just skip to base in the army straight away since all of the work there was already done. I wanted these to be city bases, since, as I mentioned, the Alpha Legion are sneaky, and I want to give the vibe of a relatively undamaged city as if the Alpha Legion have just arrived on this world, probably under the cover of night, striking so fast that at this moment much of the city is still sleeping. These were relatively simple to make, using bits of plasticard and sprue to create an effect of large, slightly futuristic paving slabs and a curb on a few of the bases. Some areas I did want to be damaged, and for these I used Stirland mud texture paint to give the look of debris, and added some small plasticard I-beams or tubes where necessary. Now everything was built and I was ready to begin painting. I had left some smaller parts in sub-assemblies to make painting easier, and also left the infantry off their bases, fixing them instead to these lollipop sticks using double-sided sticky tape, which some of them did fall off of, but it worked pretty well for my purposes. I primed the whole army black, after which I began to work on the metallic blue colour that forms the majority of the Alpha Legion's armour colour scheme. I did this by dry brushing Iron Warriors all over the armour, followed by Lead Belcher from above and Stormhost Silver just on the very top focal sections. You may be thinking this isn't very blue, and you would be right. So for our next step I used Calth Blue Clear, which seems to me the closest I can get to this official Alpha Legion scheme that I'm working off, but unfortunately it is an airbrush paint, and so works best through an airbrush. But to clean up mistakes, I did use it with a brush throughout this project, and from my experience it is possible to use without an airbrush, but it seems best to leave the paint on your palette for a while before to let it become slightly thicker and give you a little bit more control over where the paint actually goes. Next I painted all the areas that weren't going to be blue armour with black.
Yeah, this bit's actually nowhere near as fun as making them all metallic and blue and cool.
Then after all that, it was time to paint in the metal elements. I base coated all of them with Iron Warriors. I would leave this colour on the mechanical elements, like the backpack vents and the understructure of the Dreadnought, but for the trim and fancy metal bits I wanted something slightly lighter. I wasn't sure whether Iron Hand Steel or Stormhost Silver looked better in my test, so I made a mixture of 2 parts Stormhost Silver to 1 part Iron Hand Steel, and then painted this over all of the fancy bits, and highlighted it along the sharp bits of the bayonet. Next I highlighted the black elements with Eshin Grey, after which all of the guns and all of the other dark metal elements were entirely covered with Nuln Oil. Then I painted the bronze areas of the model with a 50-50 mix of Rhinox Hide and Balthazar Gold, which I washed with Agrax Earthshade and highlighted with Balthazar Gold. Then it was time to paint the eyes. I actually wanted these to be a sort of pinky purple, and it turns out that I actually only have 3 paints of that colour. But fortunately 2 of them were roughly what I needed, and I used them along with black and white to paint in the lenses and the tassel things on the Dreadnought. The lenses were painted with gradually lighter colours closer to the front of the eye or the bottom left of the lens, until white, where an extra dot was added to the opposite corner which gave it that nice shine. Finally, for painting the models themselves, I used smoke pigment powder to blacken the end of the Dreadnought's guns and exhaust. Next it was time for the bases. A relatively quick process with dry brushes of Mechanica Standard Grey, Dawnstone and Elthothan Grey over the debris, after which the rocks and recesses were washed with Nuln Oil. Some of the extra debris was painted in with a dark reddish brown and Iron Warriors, including this street lamp, which I made a while ago and I'm actually pretty happy with. I wanted to add some transfers, which by the way came in the most comedically oversized box I have ever seen. Yes, the transfers were all that I ordered, the box was just this big. But getting back on topic, these were quite simply dampened and then slid off their backing onto the model. The ones on the shoulder pads took a little more work to make lie flat, but with some small cuts they conformed well enough to the surface. And now I could finally glue everything together. Then the whole model and base was given a gloss varnish, because I wanted to give these models the impression of being rained on, so the gloss varnish would help them look wet. But the real magic would be done with this stuff. Fishing wire. It's an ultra thin transparent wire that I cut into short lengths and glued onto the base and model itself. This effect I had tested out on the Exodus a while ago, since this has actually been my test model for the army. And in case you were wondering, that's why you've actually never seen the Exodus next to everything else at this stage.
It's because I actually just painted him ages ago.
So I can say that while this rain effect isn't incredibly durable, with a couple of raindrops having come off the Exodus, it isn't quite as delicate as it looks, provided you do take reasonably good care of the models. The biggest drawback as far as I was concerned is that this is also an incredibly time-consuming process. The infantry would take me about 15 to 20 minutes per model to add the rain effect, and I was really getting into the rhythm of doing it by the end, and this was still how long it was taking. So this may not be something that everyone wants to do on their models. On the Dreadnought, I also added this runoff to the bottom of the hand, which I think really sold the look. I really like this bit. I think it's awesome. We are now really close to done. All I need to do is add some splashy ripples, which I did with this acrylic water texture from Vallejo. I painted this on in circular ripples around some of the drops or the boots, and then just made a sort of chaotic splashy effect over the rest of the base, which from a distance does give it a pretty convincing look of shallow rained on water. All that was left to be done now was one last coat of gloss varnish over the water, some black paint in the gun barrels and exhausts, and then some more of that black paint around the base rims. And with that, we're done. So, there we have it. I do hope you all have enjoyed my first foray into Horus Heresy. I do think they've turned out rather well, to be honest. Particularly the rain effect, which I'm really proud of, which you could probably tell by how much screen time it's getting at the moment. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching till the end, and I hope to see you all again soon for what should be a much drier video. Bye for now.